The week my grandmother died, my cousin took me to a market in Makati. The only thing I bought there was this piece of textile as a souvenir of a goodbye. The colors, blue and white, remind me of peace, and I have worn it often since, as a scarf mostly in cooler months, like some type of comfort blanket to remind me of Mama. In her death, she gave me the gift of grief, and with it, the mission to search for my Filipino soul.
Si ay pod ba upadan nukang tinagin do man may ulang madikagnan may takip madikaywan nukang tinagin do man gasiyon di saad ngan gapagtang dayon di man.
You, my friend, dearest of all, thinking of you makes me sad. Rivers deep are in between, forests vast keep us apart, but thinking of you with love, it's as if you were right here, standing, sitting by my side. A few years have gone by, and I have fallen in love with the sung poetry of the Hanunuo Mangyan called Ambahan. As I research more about their culture, I discover photos of Mangyan women wearing the same cloth I bought to remind me of the home I often leave behind. What a coincidence, or is it, that as I search for my Filipino soul, I reach for something Mangyan?
Pungan pagsudungan kita una magkaban. Pabaw apnig bariwan saruray no humagan kiblagan ni kuramuan sulbadan ni suudan. Magkabta araw uman pamidkan dimlisigwan patlay saghayayiman.
At this hour of the dark night, we two are together still on this woven sleeping mat. But soon, when the sun rises and the stars will melt away, our bond might break up too. When we'll ever meet again, it won't be with mortal eyes, but the eyesight of the soul. The purity of their honest words fill my soul with a sacred beauty and move me to tears. It is this treasure that I want to share with you.
I mean, it's just a magnificent story that you'll learn more about as you fall into the poetry and the writing system. You know, it was widespread in the country, and the Mangyans retained it because they lived in the mountains and did not like mixing, right? And so they would run away and they would go back to their mountains and come down only when they needed to. And that's probably informed by years of having, you know, that's the only place they found peace. And they are very much a peace-loving people. But then you retain your culture.
Like a bird, no? You try to camouflage yourself and turn out to be a different bird. Whatever camouflage or disguise that you do, inwardly you're still that bird, and you will go back. You cannot be dishonest to yourself because if you're honest and transparent to yourself, that's you.
Si manok tigbaungan, napabanwa kalapan, mapatalon sa blayan, mapalista kay ngaran unman mauman, tigbaungan limaan.
Know the bird Tigbaungan. Once he went to Calapan and went to the forest of Sablayan. There he changed his name. But his name, oh, what a shame. Tigbaungan all the same.
The identity is still the same wherever you go. You're still the same person as you are.
The first mention of the Mangyans was in 1577 by Father Martin de Rada. So they mentioned the word Mangyanes as the indigenous peoples living here in the island of Mindoro that time. Actually, there are 8 ethnolinguistic groups here in Mindoro. So they have their own different cultural traditions, practices, and distinct languages. So they are from north to south, the Raya, Alangan, Tajawan, the Buhid, Bangon, Buhid, Hanunuo, and Ratagnon. So each group, they have their own indigenous knowledge systems and practices.
Do they have any similarities at all?
Their similarity, they're all peace-loving people. Peace-loving, resilient, generous. So I would like to share that I'm really touched by Mangyan generosity because each time I go for field work when I do project monitoring, evaluation, or coordination meetings with Mangyan leaders, elders. My problem in when I go home, my problem is how to carry all the fruits and the vegetables that they gave me. So I'm really touched. Like these people that these are already their food and they would still share it with you. And it's their joy to share their harvest.
Despite their peace-loving and generous nature, the Mangyan have not escaped negative stereotypes.
I heard from my relatives that the Mangyans are they call it uneducated, because every time they will go to Batangas, beg for money, things like that. So it's a very degrading image of the Mangyans.
5 common myths about the Mangyans, like the Mangyans are illiterate, Mangyans destroy the environment, Mangyans are beggars, they are white Mangyans, and the other one, Mangyans have tails.
Halaw nilyuma diman udmay suyong hinmuiwan udmay bansay in mamban. Hanggan lang kang namban kang balibag subungan kang sugkod. Namoroyuan no bilang darag kaiwan maslayawan dikun man.
Here I am, a lonely man. Mother isn't at my side. Father did not come along. As companions, only these. Just my bow with sturdy vine, trusty spear, my walking staff. I am like a fallen leaf blown about by every breeze. And yet, it is because of the Mangyan that we have a significant body of work to give us a glimpse into the pre-colonial Filipino.
When I live with them, I begin to understand the reflection of the Filipino is very much in their culture. The Filipino soul is not selfish. The Filipino spirit is very, very welcoming in the community. The Filipinos are basically men and women of peace and harmony. And so we don't spread hatred or differences. The Mangyans are like that. And that's why in their belief, you get angry with another person, that's the beginning of evil. It will destroy you. It will destroy the bond that you have with your family and the community. And in the end, it will destroy the goodness in you, that good humanity in you. That's what I discovered in the Ambahan, in the Mangyans themselves. Kani bay paglabagan kaunaud katin-an padingat sitay adngan luwas way lugayawan may takip waya amyan alin tapukan muran. It means our house, so sweet, gentle home, more than you have ever known, not here where eyes have been shown, beyond heaven's horizon, farther than the wind has blown, away from whistling storm.
Of the Mangyan, only the Buhid and Hanunuo have been able to preserve their own writing systems.
The Buhid and the Hanunuo script are different. So they have their own primer, which we help them develop through a grant from the United States Embassy in the Philippines through the Ambassador's Fund for Cultural Preservation.
When the Spanish landed on what is now known as the Philippines in 1521, they discovered a literate population. Jesuit historian Pedro Chirino said, "All these islanders are much given to reading and writing, and there is hardly a man, much less a woman, who does not read or write." The Spanish historians were able to document 17 indigenous scripts and were surprised at the literacy level of the native people. The senior judge advocate of the High Court of Justice, Dr. Antonio Morga, wrote in 1609, "Almost all the natives, both men and women, write in this language. There are very few who do not write it excellently and correctly. By the end of the 17th century, these indigenous writing systems were largely neglected after the Spanish introduced the Latin alphabet to the Filipinos. However, a few have survived.
Kawayan sa marigit, kang kabag-uhin mapit, hurukway dariit, kang inmo manhin mapit, ararang gasinigpit, bulol anyi patipit.
The bamboo in Marigit that I saw when I first passed was just sprouting and still small. When I saw it yesterday, it was standing firm and thick, strong enough to build a floor.
Here's Anton Postma cooling his heels in Mindoro, but dreaming of going to Indonesia. He was there as a missionary, and one day he sees this man carving. Here's this piece I want to show you. Carving on a piece of a bamboo slat. They wrote not only on bamboo plants growing, they also wrote in tubes or slats like this. So here was a Mangyan writing with a knife. So he's there carving something on this bamboo slat. So Anton looks over his shoulders and says, "What are you doing?" And the guy says, "I'm writing a note to my wife." And he said, "You understand that?" He said, "Of course, I'm writing." And Anton was so stupid, So he said, "Well, you have to tell me about it." He said, "Well, let me finish my note." So the guy continues carving and then looks around and plants this slat on the ground. Okay? And then says, "Okay, now I'll talk to you." And so Anton said, "Okay, tell me what all of this is about." He said, "Well, I left my home this morning. I didn't tell my wife where I was going, what I was doing, but I've decided now that I'm up here, since I'm up here, I may as well go to the village over there, and it would take me more than a day, so I don't think I'll be home for maybe a week, because I'll be visiting other Mangyan communities rather than going back to my community on this other side of the mountain. So I'm writing my wife a note to tell her not to expect me and where I was going." So Anton said, "You wrote that for your wife?" And he said, "Yeah, she can read. Of course, And so then he said, "What did you do?" He said, "Well, do you see this path? There are two paths. I planted it in the middle, and so then a Mangyan who's walking will look at the slat, read it, and say, 'Oh, I know this man and the woman. I know they live on that side, but I'm going this way, so I'll leave it here.' The next Mangyan would come, I'd read it, and I'd say, 'Oh, I know this woman and the man. I know where they live. I'll take it because I'm taking this path,' right? So this Mangyan will carry that slat. And if he arrives at another fort and he says, 'I'm going this way, her house is over there,' he plants it at the fort again for the next Mangyan to take it to her home. And as Anton was saying, it would take about 3 days for that slat to get to the wife. And I was like, 3 days? That's better than the Manila post office, where it would take a week.
Well, also, it's so much trust on all these people along the way.
Privacy. Hey, that was Anton Postma's story to me. Okay? And then he said, after that day, I decided, what am I looking at Indonesia for? I should stay here and study whatever that script is and this Mangyan culture that has something I never expected.
Anong salud bugtungan inda kanta nagamban Katpungan pagsudungan palhitan de sa dalagban sa kiling sa kawayan sa rin mapagmag-sanan dalan man ulitangan labag man hambuyungan sumaybay yayadiman.
My darling, my beloved, let this be our very pledge now until the end of days. Let's carve this on the ceiling and etch this onto bamboo. Whenever we meet again, whatever road we travel, whether by hut or by house, you will be my chosen one.
Anton Postma, then he fell in love with the culture. And, he really took a very serious focus on the Ambahan, no? And other cultural beliefs of the Hanunuo Mangyans. And the more he stayed with them and learned their language and culture, the more he is more attracted to it, and he's in love until he decided to leave his priesthood and embrace a life of a Mangyan and marry a Mangyan. So that's the story. But he was really the moving figure of the study of the Mangyan. I think the value of what Anton Postma did was to collect and telling the Filipinos and other interested researcher that, hey guys, take a look at this. You will find something very enriching. That's why he calls it a treasure, and indeed it is a treasure. It's not gold, but it is much, much better than gold.
Nang minsang dumaan ka sa malay ko'y narito ka, bakas mo'y sariwa pa.
You once were passing this way. It's not long since you've been here. Your footprints are still around. So how old is the Hanunuo writing system? There is a hypothesis that it can be dated to at least the 10th century AD through the evidence provided by the Laguna copperplate inscription.
So Anton Postma, of course, pretty soon, because he was academic, he was very much in touch with the National Museum and, all the academics involved in language, script, etc., etc. And every time he would visit Manila, he would go to the National Museum, where he was well known, loved, and was very close to the heads of the National Museum. And so then one day he walked in and they go, Anton. Everybody called him Bapa. Okay? So it was like, Bapa, we have a copper fragment. We don't know what it is. Please help us translate. So Anton said, oh, that piece is from Indonesia, and he said, I'll see if what I can come up with. So Anton got in touch with his Dutch friend in Indonesia. The two of them worked on it, and eventually Anton came out with a translation of this copper plate and said, this is originally from the Philippines. It is not from anywhere else. That document was like a legal document from the chieftain of Tondo. So Anton said, that's Tondo. No such thing as Tondo or Tundo in Indonesia. And then it said that the chief of Tondo is forgiving a man his debt and returning the lands off, and listed a few places. Those places mentioned are in Laguna, like Pila, Laguna, and of course Tondo and other places that he said are different spelling, but are surely of these places.
And that's where Anton really came in as a gem, was his translation of the Laguna copperplate inscription, right? It took only him, National Museum, National Historical, all the academe that we had were lost. And it took some dogged Dutchman, up in the mountains with no electricity, and his determination to decipher it and unlock it. And he wrote papers, and nobody would and he'd publish them and nobody would agree or disagree. They were just afraid to do that work. He did the work. And now it's commonly accepted what he did and how he translated, but at the time it wasn't. And it just took that determination that he had. That's really special.
The Laguna copper plate inscription is considered as the oldest document found here in the Philippines, and it's dated April 21, 900 AD. The language is mainly Old Malay with some Sanskrit and Old Japanese or Old Tagalogs. And it was written in the early Kawi script. So there are some hypotheses that the Kawi script is an ancestor of the Philippine indigenous scripts, but like the Buhid and Hanunuo scripts.
That proves that we had a script before the Spaniards came. I grew up where Philippine history, pre-Hispanic Philippines was one chapter where it talked about 3 waves of immigration, the Pygmies, Indonesians, Malays, and then the Spaniards came, right? In the meantime, when I came back from college and I went to see Ramon Obusan, he showed me artifacts pre-Hispanic, and he was like, Lolita, it didn't start the way we learned. It originates longer. And then, of course, out comes this copper plate that puts the date at a 3-figure AD. So, it was really, an eye-opener, this Laguna copper plate.
Of all the Filipino writing scripts, only the Buhid, Hanunuo, Palawan, and Tagbaungan writing systems have survived. In addition to these 4 being inscribed in the UNESCO Memory of the World program, the Hanunuo Mangyan script is cited as notably still in use in their Ambahan to this day. Ambahan is usually translated as poetry, but it literally means song. The term Ambahan refers both to the written poetry and the act of chanting them. This millennia-old cultural practice of the Hanunuo Mangyan gives us insight and understanding into the pre-colonial Filipino, their worldview, philosophies, beliefs, and values.
First, historically, we don't have a written history prior to the coming of the Spaniards. What we have are probably a lot of balanghays or barangays, but I don't think before the coming of the Spaniard, we have Filipino as a sense of a national consciousness. So what we had were just communities spread in the archipelago. There was not even a term like Filipinas, no? And we know the Spaniard brought us that sense of a country, and not even a land could be owned. It's there for everybody. So you have families, communities, small communities settled along the river banks, and living together peacefully, consistently. Since there was no history about what happened, the Ambahan, they always believed that, poetry and piece of arts, oral tradition, if you take them very seriously, you will understand the pre-Hispanic Filipinos.
They don't have years attached to them because when the Mangyans wrote them on trees, on bamboo slats, on tubes, they didn't date, they didn't sign. Bamboo deteriorates.
The script, which is a syllabic script, it has been used for expressing the Ambahan, and the script was used to preserve the metaphors of the verses in Ambahan written on bamboo, and bamboo would probably live for something like 30 years. And could you just imagine how the community preserved those Ambahan, probably from the 8th or 10th century going on before the coming of the Spaniards. So it's really a treasure. And what Bapa Anton did during that time was just to collect, ask the elders to sing, and then record them. And then he started transcribing some. So there are more than 20,000 Ambahan. If you are familiar with Ambahan, the metaphors of the symbols have been recycled over and over again. They have specific, they're like codes in Ambahan. And these codes are basically symbols, biological or botanical, and animal symbols. Those things that they got from their experience from their ancestral land, from the place where they live in. So basically, you was just wondering how that spirit of the Mangyans can see the soul of a Filipino prior to the coming of the Spaniard. And there's a lot of beautiful, romantic, and even very intimate poems from Bahan that expresses the depth of the rootedness of the Filipino soul.
You're thinking that they've been around since the 8th century and the poetry just gets recycled by the community because they keep reciting it over the years.
Correct.
I
Correct.
see.
They were
And
not written
even-
on stone or metal. They were just using bamboo. And if they did not recite, they did not sing the ambahan, in every generation, the bamboo cannot preserve. Neither the script, because they sing the ambahan and they memorize the ambahan, and for them to teach their son or daughter, they have to write it on the bamboo for about 30 years, and then the children, the son of the daughter, will memorize it, at the same time learning the script and the ambahan, and they actually are inseparable. So with the bamboo, the script, and the memory of the community using oral tradition, would you just imagine if that is 8th or 10th century before the coming Spaniard is 5 centuries, and then from 16th century until now, that's another 4 or 5 centuries, maybe 10 centuries. How did they were able to preserve all these things if they don't love the ambahan? So there must be something in the ambahan, in their soul, that really enamored them, that really made them stick to it. It's not a monument, it's very intangible. What I learned from studying ambahan is that if you want to preserve the culture or the strength of a community or a society, you have to work on two things. You have to have a very strong intangible capital. On the other hand, you have to use your resources to reflect your intangible capital, which is at the heart of it would be your philosophies and values.
The Mangyans who wrote the poems over decades never signed their names to their poetry, because for them, their poetry was community property for anybody to read. And if they liked it, they could copy the poetry word for word. They can pass it off as their own. They can change it any way they want. It's theirs. It's like community property. It's for everyone. Okay, this story comes from Anton Postma. This father is with his 4-year-old child. They're going to cross a flowing river, and they will step on cobblestones and maybe on the water too. So he tells his 4-year-old son in Ambahan form that we will cross the river, hold on to me well, because if you trip and fall and we let go of each other's hands, you can go and with the river, right? But he doesn't tell the son, hold on to my hand, because this will be dangerous. He looks around, sees a nest on a tree, and recites this ambahan to his child, 4-year-old child, which basically says, look at that nest on the tree. Do you see the little birds chirping? if they move around a lot, that nest could fall and the nest would flow with the river and disappear, and the chicks would be there. And so for the son, he will look, and then in his mind, he will figure out, oh, I should hold my father's hand tightly because I might end up like the birds in the nest and flow with the river. Because that's how their minds would work.
It's not formal, and you will not see the elders forcing their children or the younger generation to, sing the Ambahan. Usually, when there's a punchon or a feast or a gathering, uh, there's an automatic, almost automatic, there will be singing. And when someone sings Ambahan, another member of the community will sing, and people will just laugh because, uh, you expect the elders to have memorized a lot of Ambahan. So the more Ambahans that you memorize, the more witty you become and more knowledgeable. So what would happen there would be like a contest of singing. More than a debate, it's basically a discourse. A discourse. That's why I call it a discourse. My definition of Ambahan is more than a sung poetry. It's a discourse, actually. Telling story, maybe teaching something. It's a lot of things in it. Just be surprised that a member of the community will just sing, and then some others who do not understand will say, "What does it mean?" And then we will try to explain it, and then and then they will laugh, and another person will sing another ambahan. Like how exciting it has been for them.
It's
That's how
like
they perceive it.
karaoke, the karaoke.
Oh yes, They're karaoke.
Yes.
The daughters will learn from their mothers, especially in a lullaby. The elder sister will be taking care of the baby, and the mother will be going out to the house looking for food. And they will be singing a lullaby. There's a part of Ambahan, especially in the beginning, very short, and it's sung over and over again because Ambahan, the term Ambahan really means a song, not a poem.
Mm.
So it's a misnomer for some researcher that they will call it a poem. It's not. It's very difficult to force fit it in the modern theory of poetry. During the time, maybe in the 10th or 8th century, if that is true, the Mangyans or the community did not have a sense of what poetry or literature is all about. It's just them. So just when you hear in their language, mag-ambahan or marambahan, you just sing. But the what you will be really become very, very much attracted is 7 syllables. Always 7 syllables and rhythmic in the end. How did they do it? The script is also syllabic. You could just imagine it. So it's very consistent. And the rhyme will be the same at the end, maybe reflecting harmony. So it's not pre-pros. Now when you sing it, the singing will be unaccompanied by any musical instrument, and you can have your own tune. Since they have been sung from one generation to another, you just listen and then they just mimic.
Just copy,
What they hear from their parents, from their elders. So eventually, through time, when they sing it, there's a kind of unwritten rule about how you sing it. Okay?
How you sing which ambahan, how you sing certain
Correct.
ambahan.
They have a very sensitive soul, very artistic, metaphoric soul, and they have a sense of the spirit around, and that's probably that's their sense of the divine.
Right.
In the study of religion by Mircea Eliade, in the history of religion, he would say that there is a profane and there is the divine in realities. And if you take a look at the holy, you will see the holy in nature. They didn't have an altar, but they have the plants, the mountains, the rivers, but they see the spirit in them. And then they respect the spirit, and they live in harmony with the spirit.
Nos anudwan, nos di tuwan. Kayaw taywas lambungan, kayaw ababayiman.
It's a fact that we all know, a truth wherever we go. The sun in the afternoon will be setting very soon.
Like a tree, when the tree dies, there's another shoot that will come. Life's continuity, we call it sustainability. And the human species will survive. It's not what Darwin would say, survival of the fittest or rat race. It's really more of our species are actually destined to commune, to be united, not fighting each other, but working together and living in a community with respect, trying to create a better version of themselves by becoming a better version of their community. And if that's happening, then you have a better world. I guess that's also reflected in the famous book by T.R. Desjardins, The Phenomenon of Man. If you happen to read that book, it's an understanding that evolution is not a fight of the species. Evolution is a continuous evolution or development of consciousness. And the consciousness goes beyond individuality to community. And if you take a look at the world right now, you have strong countries fighting, you have Americans fighting China, things like that. Play of power. But maybe there's an alternative to it. If people would be try to live, peacefully with coexistent with one another, trying to understand each other differences, then you will have peace. And peace is a important symbol that humanity has really lived in a better version of themselves.
I guess one could say I have always been a seeker of wisdom. Mama's death added to that a yearning for a cultural space of comfort and familiarity. In the Hanunuo Mangyan Ambahan, I discovered a treasure of both. The ancient sacred words of love, peace, and unity have allowed me to peer deeply into my own Filipino soul. Kuya Resti reminded me of what the Filipino hero Jose Rizal once said, "Ang hindi marunong lumingon sa paninggalingan ay hindi makakarating sa paroroonan. He who does not know how to look back at his roots will not reach his destination." In my search for my Filipino soul, I have found that I am really like a tree trying to look for my roots and strengthen them in order to one day bear fruit.
Ako kay binunawaan una ka ibidilihan, pagbabawon sa popuan, pag-uyayon sudan. Doyan yibag unamhan, soyong nugpan ranukan, sigin uya isaan. Babaw di alimahan, padig balon linyawan, akway mamaslakayan. Sa uyay rinimkan, agod mahiman manan, kang maglinyawan banban. Tawot tagababayan, tao to pudang yahan, siyon ba maadiginan, umuman sayan aban, tagsikti, batangan paghimang lawon yiman.
Back when I was young and green, a mere little baby then, nestling in my mother's lap or rocking in a hammock, tightly woven by her hand, never did she leave my side, and I nestled in her lap while a lullaby she sang. Oh, such a dear memory. How I wish I could return to my rocking hammock then so that I could truly see just how well they have raised me. You who live on distant shore, you who live up on the hills, how I wish you all could come, take a stroll and gaze at me, now a tree in glorious bloom, from the sprig I used to be.
Mula noon hanggang ngayon. Bali po, mahalaga po sa akin dahil po nandun po lahat yung mga kultura po namin. Nagpapasalamat nga po ako na may mga kultura kami na hanggang ngayon buhay pa po. Lalo na po yung sa mga produkto namin kasi po yung mga sinauna na hindi na po namin nagagawa, ngayon po nababalikan po namin dahil po doon sa mga na idokumento po ni Anton Postma po, lalo na po yung sa pagbuborda, yung sa bayong po, yung mga, may mga design po na iba na hindi po namin alam, yung katulad sa pakudos, may iba't ibang pakudos pa po, pero ngayon, utay-utay po namin na binubuhay po. Ayun po, ganun po yun.
Let's back into it, right? So first, the environment is really suitable for me, and I was very excited to be there. There's that romantic aspect. Then that bleeds into working with Anton Postma, right? By then, this is 1999, he must have been maybe in his early 70s, late 60s. And so he was very active, researching, working at this huge library of all things Mangyan up in the hills. He would spend his days there in that library deciphering texts from photographs that he'd taken of, manuscripts in a library that you didn't have access to, but he'd get in and take little, like a spy camera pictures, and then he would develop those in his dark room, and the electricity, the generator would turn on for a couple hours every night. The rest of the time there'd be no power, that kind of a scene. And he was just a wonderful guy, huge brain, huge mind, very clear-minded. And so working with him was really an opportunity and a joy, and I saw where I could fit. All right, and we can get into that later. But then the same with Father Dinter, who would come up from Calapan. He's the one who brought me up there the first time. He'd come up every weekend and do the mass. And
our first Jesuit volunteer, I asked her, "What will you take home with you and never forget in your life about your 1 year as a Jesuit volunteer?" She thought about it, and then she said, "Being with Father Dinter on Sundays." And then I said, "So why?" Right? She said, "Because for me, Father Dinter would invite me on some Sundays to go with him visiting different Mangyans communities, so I would be exposed to them. Because they were based in Calapan, where the Mangyan Heritage Center office was. But on Sundays, Father would invite her and the rest of the JVPers who were assigned there. He would always invite them on a Sunday to show them Mangyan communities, okay? Because he was in charge of the Mangyan mission, where the Mangyan Heritage Center office was. He gave us space for free, okay? So I said, "Okay, so what about Father Dinter?" And she said, "Because those Sundays when I would be with Father Dinter, it was like spending the day with God." And I'll leave you with that. Working with these two men, for me, was Mangyan treasures.
And they weren't even Mangyan themselves, but they had the heart and the mind to be Mangyan together. That is so beautiful.
Father Dinter always said, "I am German by birth, Filipino by choice, and Mangyan by heart."
I always would say that Anton was the brain, and Father Dinter was the heart of the service that was going on. And you need that kind of a mix. right? To
And what were you in that mix?
the muscle, the youth, right? Like
Yeah.
right?
The
The guy
energy,
who's gonna,
the young
the
energy.
energy, the optimism, the seeing an opportunity, seeing the long term and trying to make a difference, fundraising, writing things down that they didn't, they were focused on other things. And then of course there's the Mangyan culture. It's when you say you fall in love with the Mangyans, it's which one or all, or right? It's really indigenous people. It's Filipino indigenous culture is beautiful, right? It's beautiful. It's rich. It's beautiful, and that's easy to be enamored by. I guess the realization that he had put in so much work, and it wasn't clear what would happen down the road, right? And you see that, and you're like, okay, hey, I like everything about this place, these people, the location, whatever. And in a limited amount of time, I knew I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life doing it like he had. I was like, I think I can help with that one thing. Like, I think if we institutionalize what he has built around himself, maybe it can last longer or have a bigger impact over a longer period than just his sheer will, right? Willpower, charisma, going to Manila, talking to people, trying to get interest, right? There was that, right? So what made me set it up was I saw the need. I saw the need and the opportunity. My last visit there, you see the change of modernity coming in, and that's great. We knew it was coming, and I believe I live a modern life and believe that it is a very good life to live now, and so I would not hold that back from anyone. So what do I wish for them? I wish wealth, right? I mean, I wish that they could get an education so they could get a job and then take advantage of the healthcare that's so great and available these days, and transportation and communication, right? All of this. I mean, if I was in their shoes, or it's
You'd want that too. Yeah.
Economic development, right? It would be wrong to say, no, I want to bottle you guys up and keep you for that. Now that's what we do in the center. We're bottling it up, that culture, but we're not bottling up people. Yeah, well, we really do focus on academia, right? So what are we? At the end of the day, we're a library in Calapan with a huge collection of all things Mangyan, pictures, poems, audio, video, written, trying to digitize it all. And I think we have. At the end of the day, we want to be a resource center for them as they mature as a culture. They're going to want to learn about what things were like before, right? We believe. And so we're saying, what are we at the end of the day? Hey, we are a repository of your culture. Come and get it when you want it. It's there, right? Because one day things will change, we think, and they are. And we had access to it. And so it was a matter of preserving that. So that's really what we are. Now, we try and help in other ways. And we try and stay relevant. We try and come up with new projects, right? And we're trying to work further and further from the Hanunuo Mangyan. Not for one reason or the other, but just because that's the collection we have most of.
Right.
And because that's where the research was done. And we have limited access to the ability to create new research ourselves. Now that Anton's gone, who does it? Right? I can't go down there. And so it's hard to generate interest from Philippine universities to, oh yeah, sure, I'm going to go live in the Mangyans or whatever and study traditional. It doesn't. They know I'll work
live there forever.
No, I'll work at a BPO and make a lot of money, right? That's where we're at as a society. So it's very hard to get talented people to go there and do the research and live in those conditions. So in a way, we're stuck with what we've got. Culture is dynamic. It will always change. But what was it before it had really been
modernized, I guess.
Modernized. Yeah.
Even from the time you were there in the 1990s.
Oh yeah.
It's changed drastically.
Yeah. ABS-CBN came in around when I was there, and so you could see it. And then now it's the cell phone,
Yes, getting the youth more interested in keeping alive their cultural traditions. Like one of our program now is to help them revitalize their cultural practices like the weaving practice, the beadwork, the basketry, embroidery practices. Aside from the Mangyan script and the Ambahan, their songs, which we want them to keep alive.
Proud po yung mga kabataan ngayon kasi po minsan po daw sa school ginagawa po nilang isinusulat sa mga kamay, mga ganyan po. Pero yung mga salita nagagamit pa rin po namin lalo na po ngayon sa kabataan. May mga nagtuturo din po sa Mangyan School po na utay-utay po inaano yung surat namin. Pero yung ibang kabataan alam pa po yung sa surat Mangyan, sa pagsasalita. Ganun pa rin po, ginagawa pa rin po namin. May mga kabataan pa rin, pinapractice yung paggagawa ng beads, mga paghahabi. Tuloy-tuloy pa rin po yun. Lalo na po yung inaano din po ng dito po sa Mangyan Heritage, yung pag napunta po ako sa mga area, yun may mga kabataan pa rin po, ina-assess ko po sila. Opo, ganun po.
For the indigenous peoples, specifically the Mangyans, the land is their world. It's composed of rivers, mountains, fields, trees, flora and fauna, and the community is in the ancestral land. So the meaning of homeland is in their ancestral land. This is where their communities are and their house is.
For indigenous peoples like the Mangyans, for them land is life. So they have to secure their ancestral domain. And the challenge now is getting approval for their certificate of ancestral domain title, which takes so long for the government to give them the recognition and security of their ancestral domain claim.
So how long has that been the work been going on to secure that domain for them?
I arrived in Mindoro in 1992, and in the 1990s, they already started applying for their certificate of ancestral domain claim. At that time, it's just a claim. Now, it's already a certificate of ancestral domain title.
So
it's a communal title for each of the indigenous ethnolinguistic groups here in Mindoro.
So those have not been secured yet, right?
Very few. Because we're an NGO, a non-profit organization, so of course our sustainability is also a challenge, and we try to get funding for projects for the continuity of our programs.
Always the mothers, right? Always the mothers and the grandmothers and the role that they can play. And typically they're the culture bearers. They, especially during COVID, communicated the importance of the sales channel for their fabrics. And we always said, no, we shouldn't be a socioeconomic organization trying to help channel their produce in Manila or culture. Okay, so we always restrained ourselves to a certain amount. Now we're saying, okay, look, who's keeping the culture intact? It's the mothers. How are they able to do this? There's cash flow, right? The culture bearers have some cash flow, keeps them from having to make other sacrifices. That, and so we've broadened our perspective and said, okay, let's really try and help them with their fabrics, but let's let other people modernize it in different ways.
Yeah.
Try and keep it to traditional designs, manner of, definitely backstrap loom, right? The traditional way of making things. That let's try and keep that as opposed to having a
modernize it. Yeah.
Yeah, full on
Right. Yeah.
Let others do that and comment if they do, right? But for our organization, we have their trust, we have their that channel. Let's work it, right? Because it helps them preserve their culture.
Ang ano ko po sa mga Mangyan, patuloy po ang ng kultura po namin para hindi po namin makalimutan, lalo na po sa sunod na henerasyon. Tuloy-tuloy lang po yun. Pagsasabuhay po namin.